back to how do we create a Google quiz. Now, just for the sake of starting fresh, we're going to close all of that. I'll go and I'll delete it at a later stage. And the quiz in the form is created in exactly the same way. The difference being a Google form, or sorry, a Google quiz is essentially a way of changing a Google form around. So what you can do, just to show you the different approaches here, I could open up a new tab, go to the waffle and click on forms, and it's going to give me this landing page over here, where if you open it up, there is a couple of useful templates over here. So if you click on this expand option, it shows you a number of different templates. Here are a couple of ones that have been loaded already, built in by the Cape Winelands that they use. Not the Cape Winelands, the Western Cape. And there's the general ones that you will also have on your hand. So you can actually use these templates and import them and modify them in whatever way that you want. But for what we want to do is we want to create a quiz. So if I click on a blank quiz, what it does is it opens up a blank form, which it changes into a quiz. But we end up with that same headache of it's just going to go to your My Drive folder and it's going to make everything a bit of a mess eventually. So I still suggest going into Google Drive, the same way we created the example form, right-clicking over here and saying Google Forms. So here we're going to say it gives you the option from template. So if you want to, we can click on and say from template, or we can just click on the form and it'll go straight into a Google form. It's going to get us to the same point. Now, what we want to do before we even start with this thing, we're going to go to the settings and we're going to go to quizzes and we change it to make this a quiz. Right, so let's just go through that process again. We click on settings, we click on quizzes, and we're going to say make this a quiz. Now, I didn't make it a quiz last time because I didn't press save. One or two options here. Now, Chromebooks, unfortunately, if you have Chromebooks, you're very fortunate. We're not going to even go into that because very few people have. These are two key things we're going to return to later, the immediately after each submission or later after manual review, because this is actually one of the very often overlooked functions of Google Quiz that I think adds a lot of value when we use it effectively. Then we've got the respondents can see a missed question, correct answers, point values. You can decide what you want them to see. You want them to actually answer this thing, and when you return it to them, they see what they did right and what they did wrong. Sometimes when you do this immediate kind of marking thing, teachers don't want them to be able to know the kind of marks that they got or the correct answers because other learners are still working on it. But that depends entirely on how you're going to, how you want to implement the system into, or implement this when you're setting up a quiz. For now, I'm going to leave everything just like it is. I'm going to say save. There's a new little function that really makes life a lot easier. And again, if we go to these three little dots over here, now we haven't gone all the way there. We've slowly been making our way over there. We get to the three dots. There's a new little thing that they've added that's quite useful. And it's right here at the bottom. It's called preferences. Now, if I go to preferences, there's two little tick boxes that I find incredibly useful. The first one, if I'm setting up a quiz specifically, I use these when setting up a survey, but when setting up a quiz, this makes life so much easier. First one is make questions required. That means all the questions are going to be required. I don't have to go and click required, required, required. Remember, the default setting for a new question is that it's not required. We want to make sure they have to fill in everything. So we're going to say make questions required. And then this next one, default quiz point value, just to tick it up to 1. So now a multiple choice question is automatically going to count 1 instead of 0, which just makes sense. Just note these default settings that you see over here. This means that every Google quiz or Google Forms quiz that you set up will automatically have these settings enabled. So it's nice to have them enabled, and then sometimes when you want to set up a survey and you don't want the question required, you just go in there and change the setting again. So we'll just save that. And now when we add a new question, automatically it's 1 point and it's required. Now let's just go and delete that. Now we want to create our first question. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a little Romeo and Juliet quiz here for them. Romeo and Juliet. Right, so there we go. Romeo and Juliet. They're going to answer the questions on Romeo and Juliet. Now you'll notice it works exactly the same in terms of adding questions. I can add a multiple choice question. So for example, our first question we want to add, and here I've just got a couple of preset questions. I'm just copying from a Google Doc. So I'm not the world's fastest typer when I do these things. Who wrote Romeo and Juliet? Here's the first question. And now I've got 4 options. This is in a Google Doc. Please note when you're copying information, because this is something we didn't touch on with a survey. When you're going to copy information, when you copy it from an Excel sheet or a Google sheet, each cell will be regarded as a new row. In Word, it works the same. Word or Docs, it works the same. Each new paragraph, so in other words, if there's an enter between the two, it treats it as a new row. So I've just selected 4 rows. I'm going to paste them there, and there I've got my options. William Wallace, William Shakespeare, William Wordsworth, or William Blake. Who wrote Romeo and Juliet? Now, we're not going to give them another option because it has to be one of those. But the first thing you need to make sure of, remember, this is our first question. So our first question, we didn't have that setting enabled. So make sure it's a required question. Step number 1. Step number 2, there needs to be an answer. Right. So at this point in time, I'm asking them a question, but I haven't actually told Google what the correct answer is yet. So if we want to do that, we're going to click on answer key. And answer key will bring us to this point where we can now choose which one is the correct answer. We're going to assign a point value. Remember, our other questions are all going to count 1 mark. So we've already set that one up. And now we need to select which one is the correct one. William Shakespeare is the correct one. And now we get to the feedback option. When you spend a lot of time developing these forms, the feedback becomes such a useful tool to have. And especially when we compare it to a number of other quiz tools that are out there, because there's a lot of other quiz tools out there. Quizzes is one that I really enjoy. Quizlet is a great tool. Kahoot is one of those, almost the grandfather of these things. Lots of people have used it before. But Google Forms is especially good with a feedback function that it has. So what the feedback means is based on the answers they give, they get certain responses. So an incorrect answer, it's going to tell them, please try again. Let's just change that. A correct answer is well done. And I can even go as far as to add certain things. So here, incorrect answer, let's say I'm going to add that link to, and now if I had a link, it's just going to say it's going to link to google.com. I'm going to say go Google it. Right. So there's just a quick link to google.com and correct answers. Here I can even add a video. If I click on the YouTube option, let's just look for a yay. This is something we didn't look at last time, so you can actually Manchurian. Okay, right. So yeah, it's going to give us a whole bunch of different things. Free Manchurian green screen effect. Let's just select that one. So now it's actually going to add a video when they get that answer. Save. So let's just have a quick look at what that actually is going to look like. We'll use the preview button. Here's my first question. I need to answer it. I'm going to say William, just say William Wallace and submit. And now I can say view score. And when I say view score, it gives me the feedback that we spoke about, right? So we're going to say submit another response because at the moment I haven't locked it yet. So I'm allowing lots of responses. Let's select William Shakespeare. I'm going to say submit. This time I got it right. So if I click on view score, it tells me I got it right and it says well done, and there's a video of a man cheering me and telling me well done, that I need to play. Now, okay, that's a very strange video, so let's just stop it. So in other words, what you need to keep in mind, what you would normally use the video function for is exactly the reverse of what I did now. If they answered incorrectly and there's a useful video that they could link to that'll explain this, whether it's a video that you've made or another video that you've sourced, anything that's on YouTube, that's quite a nifty way of doing that, of actually making sure that they go to that type of video to explain a detail, something for them. Or if it's a question that's a little bit tricky, you can just simply, with text, explain to them why it can't be, why it must be what a different answer, what is wrong with it. So you don't have to add feedback. So that's the next thing I want to show you. So let's say I'm going to add another question this time, and this is what are we going to do here is we're actually going to, this is a quiz question, but we're going to ask them to type something. And there's something I want you to take note of here. Which family is Romeo part of? But we're going to make this a short answer. The quiz most of the time doesn't want you to use short answers. There's a very specific reason for this, and that is they need to type the answer exactly like you are typing it. So we're going to say answer key, and we need to give them the correct answer. So Romeo is part of the Montagues, right? But now the question is, am I spelling it correctly? Montague. Can you see the problem? If they don't know how to spell it correctly, even if it's these two answers, I would like to point out, are different answers. This one with the lowercase m and the uppercase m, these are not the same answers. Now, I think, I'm not 100% sure, I know an issue that I had in the past, I think they've corrected it by now, is even this with a space is not the same as without the space, but I think it's something that has been fixed. For that reason, I, for the most part, often say, be careful of all other answers are incorrect. I always say, be careful of using this type of question. A question that is a short answer, because learners might have the correct answer. It could possibly be that they should and they deserve to get the right marks, but they just misspelled the name. Now, from my background, I was an English high school teacher. In a sense, I would say, well, you need to be able to spell it correctly in order to get the marks. I know that's not technically how assessment works, but I always felt that you should be able to spell the family of the main character's name correctly, at least. So remember, this is very useful for informal assessment. I wouldn't recommend using Google Forms for a formal assessment necessarily. We could look at something if we have time a little bit later, how you can use it for a formal assessment, which is quite useful. But in terms of just simply a quick informal assessment, I think it's okay sometimes to use questions like that. Most of the time, I really recommend that you use primarily multiple choice questions. With that said, let's have a look at how you could possibly use the checkboxes. Now, the difference between the checkbox and the multiple choice, the radial button, is that the checkbox, they can actually select multiple answers. So if we were to go to our first question and we were to change this into a, sorry, we just need to say done, so we can change it again. If we were to change this into checkboxes, that means they can say that William Shakespeare was written by Wordsworth, by William Wallace, William Wordsworth, William Shakespeare, and William Blake, which we know is obviously not the case. When we use these, have a look at what we are going to do here, which makes it quite useful. Which of the following characters are all part of the Capulet family? Now I've added 4 options, but in this case, 2 of them are and 2 of them aren't. So we can't only select 1. We want to be able to select 2. So now we're going to go to the checkboxes option. We're going to go to the answer key, and now we need to tick the correct one. So Juliet and Tybalt. Iron Man is obviously not part of it, and Fuchsia is also not part of it. And we can add feedback if we want to, but we're not going to add feedback. Now, if you want to, because this is 2 answers that they're giving and not only 1, we can say this it counts 2 points. What you have to be mindful of is that doesn't mean if they get 1 of them right, they automatically get 1 point. It's either everything right or everything wrong. That's how these things work. So you need to get it 100% correct or you will get it wrong. So we're going to say done. Please note, I know that Google, this is one of these are some of the things that Google said they are working on in forms to allow this kind of thing that only means you need to get 1 of them and you get 1 of the marks, etc., etc. But as far as I know, it's not actually working that way yet. So now we've got a couple of questions already. We've got our first one, who wrote Romeo and Juliet? Which family is Romeo part of? Which of the following characters are all part of the Capulet family? And now we're going to go to one of the other types of questions that we said we're not engaging with yet. And that is the the question that we want to engage with now is the multiple choice grid. Now, I find these to be quite useful. The checkbox grid, not so much. The checkbox grid, again, this is one of those things that I haven't really used, but I have seen people use it very well and very effectively, and it works. It's actually quite a nifty way of asking questions if you wrap your head around it. But between these two, these can be a little bit more confusing to get right. So let's have a look at the multiple choice grid. What's going to happen now is this is not exactly like match the row and the column, but to a certain extent, this is kind of what's going to be happening. What happens is we have got rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, who said it? I'm going to ask the question, who said it? One of the things I really think is important when it comes to Shakespeare in general is for learners to try and understand who says which quote. So what I'm going to do, I've got a couple of quotes that I've got prepared here already. So there are 6 different quotes. So these are 6 quotes that have been said by 3 characters. I'm going to add the character names in here: Romeo, Juliet, and Friar Lawrence. Right, so there I've got this set up. Now I'm going to go to my answer key. Now you'll notice with the answer key, what it often does is it'll take the previous question's answers, 2 points, and it'll just decide, okay, well, this one's probably also going to be 2 points. So sometimes it tries to make predictive responses, and it doesn't always do it so well. Again, you can kind of play around with these options, etc. if you want to require a response. A lot of it is quite self-explanatory once you understand how the thing works. Let's have a look at the answer key. So now what you see over here is essentially what they are going to see on their side. They're going to see the quote and they're going to see the column. Who was the one that said it? So the first one, do not swear by the moon, for she changes. This was Juliet. Thus with the kiss I die. That's Romeo. Wise and slow. There's some of that's Friar Lawrence. Turn my heart loud and half a swear side. That was also Romeo. That was Friar Lawrence, and that was Juliet. Right. So now with all of these, I actually get the option to assign points based on the answer. So I'm going to say the first one is 1 point. That one is 1 point. This one is 1 point. That one is 1 point. And this one is an important one, so I'm going to make that one 5 points. And here I go. This one counts 10 points. So here it's actually quite nice because it's not a case of get all of it right or you get none of the marks. They get marks based on how many they get right. So we could change this just to have a look at what happens if we say checkbox grid. So now we're going to change it into checkbox grid, and the same kind of applies here. The checkbox grid is just now I can say that 3 people said it, and if they only say 1 person, they won't get the mark. So the checkbox grid works very much in the same way. It's just, as I said, it's not something that I've really used in the way that I've gone about it. But this is especially, I think, with the multiple choice. This is especially now I think I've ruined my whole thing. Yes, I have. Especially with the there again and just get an answer key set up. Juliet, that was Romeo, that was Fra Lawrence. Sorry, it's not that. Right, so as you see, if you change it to the wrong question type, the whole thing disappears. Make that 5 again. And there we go. Right, so we've got our thing set up. I think this is a very nice way that you can use Google Forms to kind of get lots of questions in quickly. Remember, it's nice for learners that they can navigate through this quickly and answer questions quickly, etc. The last one I want to show you, and for all language teachers for a second, you're going to get excited about this, but I want you to take note of this. Very important to understand. If we're going to add a question, and we add a question like this: discuss the sincerity of Romeo's love for Juliet when juxtaposed with his love for Rosaline. I know it's quite a complicated question, but there's only one way to answer this, and that is with a paragraph. Now, you'll see there's something that says answer key, but unfortunately, there's no way that any paragraph can be marked automatically. There's no system that does this. There are systems that might be able to analyze the level of language used, but that's the extent of it. So no one's going to do it for us. We need to do it ourselves. And I'm going to show you how that happens. So we click on answer key. This one is going to count 10 marks. And you'll see there's actually no where that I can go to say, but this is the correct answer, because it's a paragraph. It's impossible to give a correct answer for a paragraph. Now I've got a quiz that actually counts out of 24, and it's been set up quite quickly, I think. And once you start working with Google quizzes, you'll quickly discover that being able to copy from things that you've already got set up, going on to the internet and finding a little quiz and saying, okay, but I want to use some of this, you'll figure out ways to copy information from that. What I can tell you works very well is sometimes going onto a website, finding these quizzes that you want to be able to use. You can get, the problem is if you get your learners to go and answer those quizzes, you don't know how they did. So we want to be able to get that information. How are our learners doing in understanding this content? What are they getting from it? Then oftentimes it works well to just copy that information from there into a Google Doc, because Google is obviously a lot more clever when it comes to taking information from a Google Doc and putting it in here. These are a few tricks that I've picked up in the past that have made life easier for me when copying, trying to essentially get that information from somewhere into a Google form. There are other ways of doing it, but that becomes quite complicated.